Welcome everybody, aloha. Welcome to another one of our virtual Third Thursdays. This is the May installment. And I do want to say before we get started that we are having a June Third Thursday as well. And that's been planned already. We have we'll send out a reminder to you. So look forward to that as well. Okay. Anyway, today we have an exciting and very important topic. A newly released book. We have the authors joining us today, and I think you'll find this this material very, very interesting and timely. Okay, but before we get started, I'm going to turn it over to our executive director, Dr. Karl Kim, and he's got a couple of announcements that he would like to make. Okay, Karl.
Great. Thank you, Russell. It's great to see you all. You know, we do these monthly Third Thursdays to really check in with everyone. I think it's especially important during this pandemic. And what we like to do is to share news and information, and we have a lot of good news to report on. I think our delivery team has hit 3,000 virtual deliveries, which is which I think is really great. And I want to thank Lydia and her outstanding team, Mel and Amanda, Stephen, Danette, Marvelyn, Herman, and Jay for all their efforts in sort of pulling this together and making the transition from face-to-face deliveries to this online format, and I think that's really great for us. The other piece of good news is that Micah Fisher is joining us. And some of you may know Micah from our work with USAID and Mercy Corps. Micah brings a lot of knowledge and experience working. He's been for the last 5 years in Indonesia, but he brings a lot of knowledge and experience about forestry, flooding, urban planning, and resilience. So we're really great to have him as part of our team at NDPTC. So when you get a chance, please welcome Micah to our team as well. But for the main event today, we have a talk and hopefully some discussion by Professor Billy Fields from Texas State University, and then also Professor John Renne from Florida Atlantic University. Many of you know John because he's been a strong collaborator with University of Hawaii and many of our other projects as well too. And they've just released a new book entitled Adaptation Urbanism and Resilient Communities, Transforming Streets to Address Climate Change. I think it's a great topic, given our focus on urban planning, on natural hazards, on transportation. And I'm really delighted that they could come and share some of the findings from their new book. It's kind of interesting. I was thinking about the last time John and Billy and actually Brian Walshon and I were all together in the same room, and it was November 7th, the eve of the election in 2016, and we were at a meeting together in Oxford, and it's a reminder of both how quick time flies, and yet also how much more work we still have left to do. And so with that, what I'd like to is turn it over to John and Billy to share and present some of their work. It's great to see you guys.
Thank you, Carl. I'll just start out and let me figure out how to request remote. Not sure how to share I'm not sure how to get access to the presentation. There we go. So I want to start out, first of all, by thanking Carl and his team at the University of Hawaii. It's great to see some familiar faces like McKenna on here and others. Brian, thank you for joining us. And I want to kind of start out by saying that this is kind of like the first part of a two-part series in some ways, because Carl and Brian and I and some others are working on another resilience book that's due to come out later this year. And that one is called Creating Resilient Transportation Systems that we've been working on for way too long. But similar to this book with Billy, you know, these books seem to go on for a long, long time. But it's really great to see it come out in print. I have it in print, and you know, it is now available via Amazon and Elsevier. In fact, we'll share with you a discount code that you can pick it up on Elsevier. I think it's a 20% discount, and it's affordable because the paperback is like, I think, $40 and you get a 20% discount on it. So it's not like one of these hardcover books that charges, like if you buy the hardcover one, it's like ridiculously overpriced. So I don't recommend buying the hardcover. But let's jump into it. This is, you know, this is Adaptation Urbanism and Resilient Communities, Transforming Streets to Address Climate Change. And I want to start out by saying this is, you know, this book is like 75% Billy, 25% me. In fact, I think for like the first year, I kept calling Billy on the phone and saying, Billy, I don't understand what the hell adaptation urbanism means. And we had so many conversations framing what this concept is about. And then I finally got it. And that's our goal today, is to hopefully present to you what adaptation urbanism means, because it's a very useful concept. The bottom line is that we only get one street to work with, right? And in that one street, we have to solve a number of problems. And as you know, our book focuses mostly on, I can't seem to advance it. So if you can go to the next slide, or maybe I can do it down here. So we look mostly at coastal areas in this book. You know, we started out by traveling. Billy's made a number of trips over to Europe, and you know, he has a whole program where he brings students over to the Netherlands. And so, but we went on a really great trip in about 2017, I believe it was, or 2018, to London, Rotterdam, Amsterdam, Copenhagen. We interviewed a bunch of people. We checked out a bunch of really great projects that were transforming streets and public spaces. And what I didn't know, and what you may not know, is that these cities in Europe are experiencing flash flooding. I had no idea. I mean, I lived in New Orleans at the time. I live near Miami right now. I know all about flash flooding because I've lived and spent a lot of time in coastal, United States, Atlantic, Gulf Coast, where we get a lot of heavy flash flooding, and it's increasing because of climate change. But I didn't know that London and Copenhagen and Rotterdam and Amsterdam and Delft, that they were experiencing these what they call cloudburst events. And Billy, we'll talk more about that. Basically, Billy's going to present now kind of what this whole concept is about and what adaptation urbanism is, and then I'll join you towards the end of the presentation.
Excellent. Thanks, John. And I'm excited to be here today virtually with all of you all. Someday we can all be in the same room again. That would be really great. I would really enjoy that. Where this journey began, John kind of alluded to it. I'm from New Orleans originally, and my background was in active transportation and planning. I was working at the Rails Trails Conservancy in 2005 when Hurricane Katrina happened. And I loved Rails to Trails, I still do, but I got pulled back into working in urban planning and disaster recovery in New Orleans. So I moved back to New Orleans, and that's where I met John. And really what happened is this sort of marriage of two different fields. The transportation side, looking at streets, and then the disaster hazard mitigation side, looking at water. And in New Orleans, or many coastal communities, you're thinking about water, and you're working on this sort of relationship, right? Water is really the reason that most coastal cities exist. It provides access to trade, goods, culture, etc. And at the same time, that water poses a threat. And to figure out how to balance those needs, we need to look at spaces of cities. And cities are about 30% of space in cities is actually streets. It's this weird sort of hidden asset that's just hiding there. If you add parking, car parking on top of it, it can be up to 50% of all city space is car parking or streets. So we got this physical planning problem. Water needs to actually go somewhere, as we have more water from cloudburst events, as John talked about, or potentially from sea level rise. We need to figure out what to do with that water. And a way to begin to think about that water is to look at resilience. Let's see, I'm trying to move here, the slides, and I seem to not be able to do that. Thank you. I'll see if I can do it on the next one. But resilience is a framing device. And what's interesting is when we were in post-Katrina New Orleans, we were looking at resilience, and resilience was this topic that sort of popped up out of nowhere. And you can see on the right, we actually traced the amount of citations that resilience got from kind of urban planning and water management journals. And what you can see is in the 80s and 90s, there was very, very little interest in resilience. As you move to the 2000s and forward, you see this dramatic growth of resilience. People understand that we need to be more resilient. But the question is, what does resilience really mean, particularly in terms of cities? And what we did is framed resilience in terms of climate adaptation and climate mitigation. So climate adaptation is changing the physical landscape of cities to address the sort of already baked in climate change and potential for more. And then climate mitigation is actually decreasing greenhouse gas emissions so that your storms don't get worse in the future. So we need to figure out how to marry those two pieces together. And there's really a sort of tension at the core of resilience. Are we going to bounce back to what we had before, or are we going to bounce forward? And climate change is sort of a way to sort of focus your mind. Climate change requires us to not bounce back. We need to decrease our greenhouse gas emissions, and we need to adapt our cities to climate change. So bouncing back as an option for resilience doesn't work. But really, what are resilient streets and how do we define them? And then if you could go to the next slide, I seem to still not have control. Excellent, thanks. To sort of clarify the problem, as I said before, streets are the largest category of land in cities. They also are a driving force behind greenhouse gas emissions, transportation overall. Up to 40% of all emissions can come from the transportation sector. When you include indirect emissions, it's about 28 to 29% of greenhouse gas emissions when you just look at direct causes. And then at the same time, particularly in the United States, we've got a huge crash fatality problem, over 40,000 fatalities in recent years. And then when you add air pollution on top of that, you end up with thousands more fatalities. We got a system that isn't resilient. Our status quo streets are not resilient. And what we need to do is find a pathway forward. If you go to the next slide for us. Excellent, thanks. And so what we did is we reviewed the literature, looked around, and looked at what we think the best practices to address these issues might be. It's exploratory. We're moving towards this new age of planning and the age of climate change. What does that look like? So what we did is identified 4 particular areas that streets and cities need to sort of fulfill. first, you have to have compact development, so you don't have large sprawling areas. And when you do that, you begin to manage your greenhouse gas emissions. But you also need access to sustainable transportation, transit, walking, and biking. When you get shares above 50% or so for cities, you start to really make a dent in terms of your greenhouse gas emissions. So that's kind of where we need to be aiming for. And then we also need to be managing water. So we need blue and green infrastructure to act to sort of soak up water. These can be little bitty green spaces on the side of streets to large parks. And finally, when you do all these things, you create a really nice city. And when you create a really nice city, you put pressure on housing. Equity is a key dimension of resilience, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But those 4 dimensions are what we're looking at. So what we did for our case study cities is evaluated resilience plans and did a place analysis of those emerging resilience districts. Next slide, please. Excellent. So what do we find? We found that Copenhagen and Rotterdam were resilience streets leaders. I'll give you a visual case study in just a minute, show you some pictures. Here's an example of one of the pictures from Rotterdam. Just love this image. This lady just walked right out the door of her house. She's an older lady, jumped on her bike, and the city was hers because it's safe. Flowers, lovely. When you create these type of spaces, you create access to all different types of people. So safety is at the core of what a resilient street system looks like. We also found that in London, Miami, and New Orleans, they were less integrated in terms of their overall resilient street planning. They made some advances, but they hadn't put all the pieces together. So what is a resilient streets? What is the definition of resilient streets? Basically, it's slow speed or sort of vision zero, if you've heard that term, design, with green and blue infrastructure woven together to manage water, with livable communities as the base. All of that adds together, and when you do that, you create an adaptation urbanism system. And John mentioned the term. We coined this term because what we wanted to do is we wanted to marry the idea of adaptation, adapting our cities, to the core ideas of good urbanism, of good planning. Adaptation urbanism ties those 2 pieces together. Next slide, please. And I'll kind of move us, and you can move forward to the next slide. I'll just jump right into the visual case studies. So one of the cities that we cover is Rotterdam, and Rotterdam has experience with disasters. The central part of Rotterdam was destroyed in World War II. You can see in these 2 images, and it just hurts me to look at these images of what Rotterdam was. The image at the top left was circa 1920, and you can see the old train station. This is not the central train station, but Hofplein, I think it's Hofplein train station. And in the bottom image in 1945, you see that same red circled area and then the center destroyed. And post-World War II, it's being rebuilt in the 1950s, the era of high modernism and US-style big streets. So what happened is that many of the canals were actually the debris from the bombing was thrown into the canals, water was buried away, and wide and fast roads were built. And the Rotterdam story tells us something else too. It tells us streets can change. So Rotterdam developed this system in the 1950s. And what I'm going to show you over the next couple of slides is how that process changed over time and how they went from streets that looked very much like US streets to this new vision of living with water and resilient streets. Next slide, please. Here we go. So here's a perfect sort of description of what happened in Rotterdam from a post-war reconstruction website, clearing the way for cars. The area that we're looking at is right adjacent to the train station, and you could take this picture, and it could be pretty much any city in the United States, North America, basically large swaths of space for the automobile. Basically, the idea was Le Corbusier, we have a quote from Le Corbusier about burning up tires and roads and the environment and space to provide jobs for all. And really what you see here is this idea of building vertical density and then spreading out via the automobile. Next slide, please. And then here we go. Here's the same area, kind of we zoomed in on it. This is the Zoho district. It's a resilience district. And what you see in the image on the top right is water barrels. And actually this used to be a street. It used to look like kind of any other street that you saw in that original image. And now you've got this water garden in place of a street. Just outside of the image, you've got space for walking and biking. So you've got these safe green streets that soak up water. And that's really the vision of adaptation urbanism. Vision zero type streets, safe streets with water sensitive components added together. And we found was in Rotterdam, this vision is moving forward. Next slide, please. And we also found this in Copenhagen, and I've just got a couple more quick slides for you. But Copenhagen is expected to experience 30% more rainfall by 2040. There was a large flood that happened, I think it was 2011, 2012, and they created a resilience district to look at how to handle water better. The image on the top I took in 2017, just kind of a nondescript road, lots of asphalt. I actually took the same image from the same vantage point in 2019 after this huge revitalization. An urban forest with the ability to soak up water was created. A cycle track was put through. Families are moving through. It's lovely. It's nice. There's a cafe that developed right next to it because there's an amenity. All of this happens because they're thinking about multi-dimensional uses of space, about tying water, place, and active transportation together. And it's a perfect example of this sort of emerging form of what resilient streets are looking like that we found in the book. Next slide, please. Cool. And I'll give you one from North America. Here's Vancouver. This was a street right next to where the Olympics were held. And really what they're doing there is really interesting. They have a template that looks just like any other street in kind of North America. And what they've been doing is pulling together green spaces, actively putting in green infrastructure to soak up water. So you can see that with this kind of bioswale here. On the right is a cycle track. Unfortunately, there were lots of bicyclists, and for some reason I didn't take the picture with cyclists, but you got to imagine lots of cyclists going by there because that's the way it felt. And what they're doing is really integrating protected bicycle facilities on higher speed streets, just like you see here. And they're using green infrastructure in that case. And then in neighborhood streets, they're doing the same thing, but they're using the green infrastructure to traffic calm streets through little mini bioswales, traffic circles, and those other components. Next slide, please. And then finally, I'll leave you with the image, and then John's going to jump back in and give you some policy ideas. But for our last visual case study, we'll look at Utrecht. The image on the left is Utrecht. They basically buried their canal and put in a giant kind of freeway system. And then they said, what are we doing? This is not what we want our city to be. This isn't what we want our city to be like. In the top image there, you can just make out the church. There's a church in the image on the left. And then on the image on the right, you see what happened. It's like a disaster movie in reverse. Essentially what you see there is Utrecht basically putting the canal and the water right back into their city. Increased connections for walking and biking to the train station, which is immediately adjacent. And Utrecht has become one of the leaders in active transportation in the world. And what happens is they're decreasing their greenhouse gas emissions. At the same time, they're creating this incredible livable city with living with water as its sort of center. So you can see a little Bicycle Dutch, which is a great website if you want to visit. They have an article from traffic sewer to city park. And that's really the ideas at the core of adaptation urbanism. John, I think that was the last slide. Yeah, for me.
Yeah, so, the book has a lot of good case studies from the Netherlands. And oftentimes, you get, well, this is the United States, it's not the Netherlands. And so let me say, we also have case studies from New Orleans and from Miami and also London. London is doing a great job. London, there's a lot of similarities between large US cities and London, and they have their whole Healthy Street initiative, which brings the whole public health element into it. And we write about all of that. But what this whole book is trying to do is to bring together the concepts of reducing carbon emissions to solve climate change issues, adapting infrastructure to solve the impacts of climate change, predominantly flooding issues. And then, there's that health dimension that is also so important, because as we make our streets more green and as we, incorporate more water features, into our communities, it really does create a lot of significant public health benefits. This slide here shows New Orleans, during the Katrina flood on the left, but on the right side, we see a part of the world where I live in South Florida, and this is flooding from saltwater intrusion due to king tides. This is not, a flash flood event. This is water coming up from the ground about 60 days a year. You see these conditions in parts of Miami and Fort Lauderdale, and certainly now the Keys, and also where I live up here in West Palm Beach, we're seeing it as well. And it's it's the kind of the visual impacts of sea level rise, and we're seeing it first during the highest tides of the year, which occur typically in the fall and the spring, but it's it's just going to increase and it's going to get worse. Next slide. Can I control this? Let's see. Okay, so oops, there we go. So part of the issue is that we have these professional silos, that operate in the field of transportation. Many of us are engaged in TRB, and TRB does a good job to try to bring in a multidimensional vantage into a lot of the issues. But at the same time, we also know that professionally these silos hamper our ability to make resilient decisions, or decisions to improve resilience. Water management, transportation, don't often work well. They don't work in the same spheres. Obviously, civil engineers work hard to ensure that new roadway construction adheres to MUTCD, the standards for designing streets, as well as other, engineering standards from ITE and AASHTO, Green Book and whatnot. But the problem is that it has solidified a institutional way of designing streets that when you try to do something differently by, not necessarily channeling water underground in sewers, it becomes very challenging to go against that inertia. And so we need to be able to work across silos. Next slide. Or let's see if I can control this. I can, it's just a little delay. Disasters, they don't care about professional silos. They come through and they wreak havoc. And so it does take interdisciplinary collaboration to work across disciplines to come up with resilient decisions. There was also one other slide that I think probably got lost, is that disasters don't respect political boundaries. We often work in our political boundaries, within municipalities or counties, sometimes states, where disasters will come through, and we need to work across sectors and across jurisdictions, predominantly often from one city to the next, from one county to the next. And we have policy tools that can help solve that, like metropolitan planning organizations, but most MPOs have not really gotten too heavy yet into thinking about adaptation. They do think about air quality, and some have plans for reducing climate emissions, carbon emissions, but they haven't really incorporated the microscopic scale down to the street level. So what is this policy framework? Before I get into these 3 points, I want to start by saying I just read a really good article by Richard Florida and Joel Kotkin that came out a few days ago that talked about how what is happening now from a transportation standpoint are the largest shifts that we have seen since World War II. Karl Kim and Scott Parr and Brian Wilshon and Pamela Murray Tuitt and I wrote an article last year that looked at the impacts in Florida during the post-COVID era, and we saw, you know, this precipitous decline in traffic very, very quickly in March of 2020. And while traffic has started to return, the Florida and Kotkin article stated the other day that 30% of Americans are still working at home today, a year after COVID started. And that's in comparison to 5% before COVID. A study done that they cited by the website WeWork, I think it's WeWork or Upwork, one of those websites, states that approximately 20% of Americans will permanently work from home. Okay, that's a huge shift, you know, from where we were pre-COVID. And so, and the article also stated that the survey that they did stated that up to 50% of Americans may work at home at least 1 or more days per week. I mean, that's radical transformation, right? And so how is that going to impact our cities? We hope that these concepts of returning some of the street asphalt space to solve these water issues and to re-envision streets, you know, will hopefully take fold. Once we get into autonomous vehicles, which I think is within the decade, people may no longer own cars. And we know that cars are parked, you know, 99% of the time. I mean, streets are in essence large parking lots. And if we move to a new model where we're not necessarily owning cars, but we're just calling up cars as a service when we need to use them through our smartphones, then we're going to free up a lot of space in cities. And we're going to be able to do that, I think, within the next 10 to 15 years. So we need to start thinking about how do we link funding to core outcomes of policy concerns in the climate change era. One way to think about that is not just, like I said, under the current paradigm that we exist in, but thinking about the paradigm that we may be existing in literally within the next decade. And finally, working towards linking the agenda of the Vision Zero, the safety, the equity issues that we see in our society, climate, smart growth, and public health. There's a lot that, you know, we have a much longer PowerPoint that gets into more depth, but of course we wanted to leave more time for Q&A. So I'm going to kind of wrap it up there. This is an image. I'll let Billy describe this last image because I believe this comes from Copenhagen. This is a bioswale that they implemented there. And Billy will summarize this last image and we can get into the Q&A.
Yeah, the image that you see here is just you don't have to change everything all at once. You can have a small little bioswale on the side of the street, which you see here, a cycle track. It creates a safe space. It works really well. And then we have one more slide, John, if we can go to that. Which is from, oh, we got rid of it. Oh, well, we had a slide from Barcelona that was going to ask an interactive question. What would you do to make your street more social? So maybe we'll just ask you that. What would you do to change your street to make it more social? We'd be glad to answer any questions, have some dialogue. We really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you today.
Yeah, that was a great presentation and a terrific summary of a lot of material that you've covered and presented. And I'm sure there's going to be lots of questions and comments, but, you know, I'd kind of like to kick it off by saying, you know, looking across these different countries, as you have done, can you describe some of the differences that exist between the systems that are in place for, you know, such as Copenhagen versus South Florida, and I know that affects the behaviors and the policies and so forth, but how far away are we in terms of, you know, really trying to move towards more active transportation and the recognition of the benefits that you've identified?
And John, maybe I'll jump in for this and then you can jump back in. I'd flip it around. How similar we are. What's interesting is that Rotterdam wasn't always Rotterdam, Amsterdam wasn't always Amsterdam, and Copenhagen wasn't always Copenhagen. There are various authors in those places who've used those terms, so not hat tip to them. But what we found was very much that those cities had really moved in this exact same direction that we did in terms of integrating cars into their built environment and burying water away. And what we've seen is that somewhere around 1975 or so, they shifted direction. And so what they've done, over the last 40, 45 years or so, is built a new set of institutional standards. And those standards for streets are based around Vision Zero and sustainable safety is the version in the Netherlands. And what that does is it places safety first. And we are at a moment now where we're also experiencing these sort of political tensions. Vision Zero movement has developed in many cities around the US, but we don't really know what it means. And we can look to our Dutch and Danish counterparts and see basically that there's a lot of push that it takes to change these systems. So right now we have these systems that are based around speed of automobiles above all else. And we have a political movement, various bubbles of political movements that are pushing at that. And that's really what we saw. There's not sort of one way to fix this, but it's a set of professional standards that limit our ability to see the potential to tie water, livability, safety, all these pieces together.
Yeah, I really like that. John, you want to add to that?
I do want to share. Can I share my screen really briefly? Let me see if this works. Can you all see my screen?
Yep.
Okay, so in the Netherlands, they have an extensive canal system, and they've taken advantage of that canal system to put a lot of bicycle infrastructure alongside of that. This right here is South Florida. I live here in West Palm Beach. This is downtown West Palm Beach. This is Boca Raton. This whole area is completely built out with suburban sprawl. But I made this map recently by just taking, I just looked at the natural water features in South Florida. And there is one bicycle trail that goes along a canal, and it's right here from Boca Raton to my campus, FAU, right? And I get on the train here in West Palm Beach, and I get off the train, I bring my bike on the train, and I ride along this canal to campus. And it's a very highly utilized canal path, bike path, because it's safe, right? We have some of the worst traffic fatality rates and safety rates in South Florida. We're like, the worst in the country. And so we as a region have not taken advantage of this extensive canalway system that could be doubled up to utilize and have a lot of permeability and accessibility using electric scooters, using bikes, using rollerblades, connecting neighborhoods into the train stations that exist, into shopping centers and schools and everything else that exists in this area. So, so the difference that I see in this case, Karl, is that, they're taking advantage of their infrastructure way better than we are. I mean, we have this tremendous resource here with this canalway system in South Florida. I bet most of you never knew South Florida had a canalway system, right? But we do, and we're not taking advantage of it. And we could be like the Netherlands if we just built, paths along this that probably, I'm guessing, could be built for under, 100,000 per mile, which is literally pocket change in the world of transportation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there are lots of comments that are coming in on the chat. I don't know if you want to pick them up or respond to some of them, or if others want to ask a question, unmute yourself, and let's try to be as interactive as possible.
Billy, do you want to talk about the water squares? I saw a question on here about other examples of water squares.
that was exciting. People love water squares. So yeah, water squares are an interesting way to look at sort of rethinking water as well. So what we, most of what we looked at was streets and street space. But one of the things that you can do is you can actually reclaim street space and turn it into kind of public parks and then weave the streets through. The example from Sankt Keldsplads in Copenhagen was an example of that. Also Tosingaplads, which was kind of one of the main projects in Copenhagen, is a good example of that. In Rotterdam, they also have this, in the area that I was showing you pictures of, this kind of high modernist area, there were a series of high rises and the water drained off and it flooded. And what they did is they actually turned, it's the Benthamplan water square. They turned the kind of area, the courtyard in the middle, into a depressed space and put in basketball courts and all sorts of other stuff. And most of the time works fine, it's a basketball court. When it rains, it fills up with water. And so that's a really interesting example of a multifunctional space. Someone also asked about maintenance. That was one of the key complexities of that project. The kids, there's a school next door and the kids throw trash in and the designers didn't factor that in. So it tends to clog up. And what Rotterdam has done is moved away from these sort of big mega projects like that into smaller, simpler squares in neighborhoods, more like what you see in the Copenhagen examples. So there are different ways to think about maintenance and scaling these projects up.
It's also, you know, if you look at like a lot of the projects that I think create the most value, they basically, you know, recreate the natural feature as it existed before we put a bunch of concrete, you know, and tried to channel the water everywhere. So allowing water to percolate back into the ground, into the water table is important. And, you know, that can actually reduce infrastructure, you know, not just reduce infrastructure costs for maintenance, you're simply reducing infrastructure by allowing these natural parks, these natural features to be reintegrated into the public areas.
Hey, Carl, this is Brian. I got a quick question. Should I type it in or just ask it?
Go ahead, ask it, Brian.
Okay. Guys, great presentation. Loved them both. Man, such great information. And it's such an area, as Billy showed, that, you know, we're still learning as we're going on this. So it's great to hear like international experiences and perspectives. There's something going on right here in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, that sounds so close to what some of the things that you described in Europe are, but it's done under a different guise, I guess. They're not calling it resilience. It's called a road diet. And I don't know if you're familiar with that term, but what they did is they took this really congested 4-lane corridor. So it was 2 lanes in each direction, which made it difficult for left turns, which also made it a little bit difficult for, it was certainly a safety problem, totally a problem for pedestrians. And what they did is they took the street right of way and they narrowed it down to 2 lanes with a center left turn lane. And they took the other, the other width, if you will, and they made it so it was more walkable, more pedestrian friendly, more, you know, cafes and that kind of stuff. But it's still looked at here as a big experiment. And the experiment is whether or not it will be commercially viable, because you have all these businesses that were super busy along that, and they relied on that pass-by traffic to capture their business. What was promised to them is what they will lose in auto traffic, maybe cut in half. They will more than make up based on the pedestrian activity that's going on. Have you seen anything like this? Or some of those places that you studied, is it commercially viable, Billy, where they take away all this space, you know, car traffic, if you will, that we know is crazy, but that's kind of the lifeblood of a lot of the businesses that are along these corridors. What's that relationship like?
Yeah, this happens in every single community that ever does this. It happened in 1960, whenever in Copenhagen, when they built the first pedestrian mall in Europe. And everyone said, oh, our downtown is going to die because we do this. And it was great. And the Netherlands, same thing. Everyone said, oh, everything's going to die. And it was better. In what we do, an example in London, in the Mini Hollands area, which basically they took Dutch ideas and then brought them over to London. And there was actually a mock funeral for the downtown, for the little high street area. They actually carried a coffin. Oh, it's terrible. I went. It was lovely. The businesses had more business, according to press accounts from there. There were, I counted somewhere in the neighborhood of like 15 prams, families with prams walking around. It was lovely. It was nice. Business was doing better. And that story is repeated over and over again. When I worked at Rails to Trails, we looked up this kind of data as well. And what you see is that every time this happens, people think, oh, I need cars to make business. Well, people in cars don't shop. It's people out of cars that shop. And so there's a robust literature on this, but the storyline is the same in every community.
Really?
And what's interesting, you kind of called it an experiment. I saw another question about how to unsilo. One of the things is to actually think about taking and doing experiments. I don't like the term experiment, so you call them a pilot project. But the resilience districts are a great way to do that. What we saw in Copenhagen was that the resilience district was a way to get the water folks, the active transportation folks, and many other groups together in the same area, and then work on local solutions that make sense. Everything that happened in Copenhagen, you can't just plunk down. Most of it you can, that's really great. But you need to make some changes locally and build those connections. And that's a way to do both. So you can hit both of those things at the same time.
And is that Los Olas Boulevard in Fort Lauderdale, John? Is that what they did there?
Yeah, they did that in, I believe they did it on Los Olas Boulevard. They've also done it in Delray Beach, which is just north of Fort Lauderdale. They've done it in New Orleans, Brian. You could go check out Camp Street, which goes right in downtown New Orleans. They took a lane of traffic away from a car and made a bicycle boulevard there. They're starting to do it on other streets in New Orleans. Also, you know, Billy's talking about the silo thing. The New Orleans has now a resilience district in Gentilly, which is kind of the quote unquote suburban part of New Orleans. It's not, you know, it's a couple miles towards Lake Pontchartrain from the French Quarter. And that neighborhood, you know, is a neighborhood where they're trying to bring together all these concepts of, you know, uncovering the water. They put a whole water management plan together probably almost 10 years ago now in New Orleans. And that, you know, there's the Lafitte Greenway, which was kind of a big part of that. And this neighborhood resilience district in Gentilly is a big part of that. We just actually did another one of these, and our colleague who wrote that section of the book, she presented on that, Tara Tolford, who I think you've met before, Brian. But anyway, the answer, I agree with Billy, is that you know, you can't do a road diet on every street. It works generally in the right, you know, conditions and the right, you know, places. Your question about retail, you know, and the viability of retail is more about like kind of a Main Street kind of a situation. And you know, those kind of get a lot of the press, you know, a lot of like, everybody knows, you know, kind of the main street of their city, and everybody has an opinion on what should happen on that, right? But the bigger issue is really, I think, a lot of these major wide arterial streets that crisscross our suburbs, you know, all over the United States. You know, like in Florida, we have these, you know, these 8-lane arterial streets, you know, that are impossible to cross. And so, you know, my question is like, you know, and we have terrible traffic, so they're full of cars, right? So the idea of saying we're going to take a lane of traffic away on a street that's already overly congested is like, you know, it's like, you know, adding insult to injury, right? But the question is like, how do we take events like COVID and the dawn of autonomous transportation to make some significant changes to the way we utilize our public space? You know, can we create HOV lanes on arterial streets that, you know, buses and autonomous or Uber and Lyft drivers can share, right? To free up some space for cycle tracks or to make sidewalks wider to have more, you know, livability features like landscaping and bioswale. So, you know, these are in my mind, like, you know, while it's very fun and exciting to talk about, you know, what happens on, you know, Main Street, Baton Rouge, that's not going to move the needle in terms of carbon emissions. We need to really start thinking about all of our streets.
Yeah, John, I was actually going to ask you both, could we be going too far in terms of embracing? I mean, I'm all for diversity in all of these different modes of travel. I think that's great. But then if we start adding segways and scooters and electric bikes and automated vehicles and all of these different new technologies that we see sort of happening at the same time, how do we kind of bring them together, coordinate them, make sure that they're supportive? I mean, I suppose there is a degree of competition that you need to have in order to figure out which ones are really viable. But at the same time, too, are you encountering places where there's just, you know, too many different types of micro mobility systems that are coming out as yet?
I think the big challenge is the electric bicycle and the electric scooters. They go, you know, 20, sometimes almost 30 miles an hour, right. You know, especially the electric bikes. You know, that can result in some safety issues, you know, when you've got a pedestrian. In fact, today I bought this huge cargo bike, you know, that seats my 4 children in the front of it, and I pedal in the back, and it's electric. It goes 15 miles an hour. And so I was biking, you know, my kids, after I dropped off my kids at school, I was biking home, and I was kind of coming around, and we have this path, this bicycle path that goes along, that goes on, there's one on the intercoastal side of Palm Beach, and then there's one on the intercoastal side of West Palm Beach. And so I use those a lot, and a lot of other cyclists, you know, electric bikes do. And I was coming around the corner today, and I've got this, like, it's like the SUV of bicycles. It's like the Suburban of bicycles. I'm coming around the corner, and there's this other bike zooming at me, probably going 20 miles an hour. And I almost killed the guy, you know? And so, yeah, I do think that, you know, as most people don't ride bikes nowadays, but, you know, if we see a 20 or 50-fold increase in cycling, particularly with electric bikes, which I think is possible to see. I mean, electric bikes, once you ride an electric bike, it's like a whole new world opens up. And so, you know, I think we're going to have some safety issues with that we're going to need infrastructure to solve, you know?
So the Dutch have been dealing with this for a long time. And they have in some places, I think they banned them in Amsterdam, but they're motor scooters, and the motor scooters can only go a certain limit speed on the cycle facilities. And people change them out and they go too fast, and there are issues. And so the Dutch have been working with it. But the idea of figuring out sort of speed zones for different people. There may be electric skateboards, electric bikes, regular bikes. There's a sort of slow speed lane. And then if you want to go faster, great, jump in with the cars. So there are different ways to sort of manage those speeds. And the Dutch actually, Mobicon Consulting has created a whole plan looking at that. They're based out of Delft. But I'll also put it on the flip side, electric bikes, oh man, like John was saying, it opens up huge possibilities. 50% of all trips right now are 3 miles or less in the United States, and it's actually very similar in Europe. So 50% of our trips are within easy range of a regular biking trip. And then there's a whole different sort of market of people who might be open to riding electric bikes. And when it's safe, convenient, and easy, you will. In Copenhagen, their bike share system is electric, or at least it was several years ago when I used it. And the whole city was available to me all within 15 or 20 minutes. It was safe, easy. Everyone was moving because there's at a certain point, congestion actually becomes your friend in terms of managing speed. Everyone sort of goes the same speed. So we're all kind of going the same speed. 15 or 20 minutes, the whole city was mine. It was great. And so I think that there's a lot of potential to look at electric bikes, and then managing those, the speeds is possible with design and other features.
There was a question in the chat about the resilience district. Is it a coordination, collaboration mechanism, or a separate agency? I don't think we've seen instances where it's a separate agency. It tends to be kind of like a neighborhood scale planning effort that allows, you know, people from different departments within a city to kind of collaborate on a shared vision for a specific outcome for a neighborhood. So think of it, you know, as like, you know, like we have, you know, comprehensive plans that kind of set the city's vision. You know, then we have zoning, which says what you can and can't build, right? And then we have like specific plans like transportation plans and housing plans and parks plans. And then sometimes in planning, we have these specific like corridor plans or neighborhood plans. And a resilience plan or resilience district is kind of like a plan for a specific part of town that tries to coordinate across different systems and different infrastructures.
Well, I see we're now already out of time, and I think you know, it's a measure of how interesting this was, because I could have easily gone for another 2 hours with you guys, but I do want to get you out to Hawaii, because we're trying to do a Vision Zero project here in Hawaii. We've got lots of opportunities to really promote active transportation and also make the important connections between hazard risk reduction and climate change and sea level rise and the other stressors. And so I'm hopeful that you guys get out here sooner rather than later, and we'll be able to kind of follow up. Thanks for posting your contact information. I'm sure there will be follow-ups and others. Any closing thoughts from Billy, John?
Go ahead, Billy. I'm putting our email addresses in here in case anyone has any other questions. So go first, and then I'll do it.
Yeah, and I'll just sort of the questions that we got, I like. They're based around how do we move forward. And one of the things I'll just sort of reiterate is that all the examples that you saw today, every single one of those folks in those cities had to overcome the same challenges. Sometimes it took 10 or 20 years to do it, right? And that's a long time, but we're chipping away. And each time we have sort of one of these sort of opportunities where we get a project in our city, it expands the possible again. And what we've seen during COVID particularly is that the possible has gotten much wider. You see that the world isn't going to fall apart if you change your street. In fact, it could be really, really nice. And opportunities like that seem to be developing more and more. And so the scope of what may be possible is really expanding. And what we did in the book is looked at the foreign planets of Copenhagen and Amsterdam and Rotterdam and looked at what happened there. And then hopefully we're going to try and figure out how to translate those into your communities. And we look forward to chatting with you. And if you have more questions, John and I would love to talk more about this. It's a really exciting topic and a really great set of questions today. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Billy and Carl. And I posted our emails and our Twitter feed handles in there in the chat window. Also, don't forget, you can get a 20% discount on the book, and I posted the discount code up above. It's you go to Routledge's website, and the code is ESPAC. What I just want to state is that the changes that are coming to the transportation field and to the land use and just generally planning and policy are happening faster than we ever thought could happen. A year ago or just over a year ago, before COVID, if you would have told somebody that within 2 years, 30% or 20% of Americans will work home permanently, and potentially half of Americans will work home at least one or more days per week, they would have told you that you would have had to come up with a massive federal subsidy to incentivize employers to have people not drive from home, right? That it was like impossible to think, how could we subsidize people to get them not to commute, right? And now all of a sudden, we don't need to subsidize people to make them want to work at home. We've gone through a black swan event with COVID. It's really reshaped how we're thinking about things. And we're at the dawn of an era where electric vehicles by the year 2025, okay, that's in 4 years from now, are expected to cost on average $18,000 a piece compared to the average gasoline engine, which is going to be over $26,000. Okay, that comes from Wall Street. Okay, that's what Wall Street is saying right now. That is going to tank the automotive industry and the petroleum industry. What's going to happen when that happens is that we're not going to have any more gasoline tax to pay for our infrastructure. It's going to force us as a society to have to rethink how we fund transportation. As we go through that process over the next 5 to 6 years, we are really going to have to radically rethink how we pay for transportation, which means the burden is going to shift to local governments. Okay, the federal government's not going to continue to write the kinds of checks that they used to in the 1950s and 60s and 70s. They're going to place more burden on local governments to fund their own transportation systems. So that means that as planners and policymakers, we need to start thinking very quickly about how are we going to grapple with these massive changes happening, right? And then once we get all that sorted, after electric vehicles wreak havoc on our transportation funding system, then we're going to have autonomous vehicles, which is going to change the dynamics even further. So that's what's going to happen over the next decade. We didn't expect COVID, but it's here. It's changed things. We expected electric transportation, and autonomous transportation is going to be on the heels of that. So it's up to us. Those of us on this call are the experts. We need to be able to figure out how to advise the policymakers and elected officials how to handle these challenges. And, this book is just the tip of the iceberg, but there's a lot more to come, and I look forward to collaborating with a lot of you and figuring out these interesting and challenging problems. It's a fun time to be working in this field.
Yeah. Well, that's great. So I want to close this event by thanking you both very much for spending time with us. I know it's late on the East Coast and later in Texas, but again, we really do appreciate your time with us and hope to see you in person sooner rather than later.
Thank you, Carl. Thanks, Billy, and thanks everybody who put this together. Thank you all
Thanks so
for
much,
joining
y'all.
us.
Thank you.
Cheers.